Hello. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Rory. Have you been vaccinated yet?
I've not been vaccinated yet. Have you been vaccinated yet?
Yes, of course I have. Far more obviously here. You'd have to check the scrum. Where are you in Boston?
Yeah, I'm on the Connecticut coast, and yeah, I've got to wait. It's a big scrum. I liked you. You were suggesting maybe that what I could do is sell my position in the vaccine queue, like selling a ticket outside a rock
Well, I
concert.
hear that's what's happening all over America now that you've defected.
It's lovely to see you. You're looking very well.
Well, you still look like an 8-year-old scruffy schoolboy.
Oh, that's scruffy come from you, Bob. Uh,
It's sort
tell
of your shtick, like you always look exactly the same.
I was just looking at a photograph of you from the 1970s, a kind of interview that you're doing. I think you're in somewhere in Europe. I want to say maybe in a German city or in Amsterdam or something. And it's amazing actually because you really look exhausted. You look like you've been up for nights. This is sort of 1976 or something. Staggering into the screen. I'll send you the clip. Well, tell me about your experience of COVID. How's it been? What's your sense of, and what's it mean for you? What's it meant for the industry? How's it changed the world?
Um, I think, like everybody else, it started off novel and nice. Nice because uh, it was such an extraordinary spring in Britain. I think you were here for it probably at the beginning. And then an even more beautiful summer. And I'd never lived in the spring. I'd lived through springs. And maybe when I was 5 or 6, I lived in it. But having to be in that in that season, and it was seriously beautiful. Now it's just I'm so fed up, and I'm brain dead, and it's like nothing happens in my head. It's just this vast void, this lacuna of time, a lost year. And in the space of that year, which has been fairly radical for you, we brought out a record, a film, a book, singles, thing, and all of them, of course, were swept aside in the COVID rush. I mean, I think we brought out the last Boomtown Rats album the day before lockdown was declared. So that was it. And we're booked in again for the festivals we missed last year. But I'm worried that they won't be COVID compliant. I'm worried that the government, as ever, is not issuing any. It's just confusing what the instructions are issuing. So that's been it. But you, on the other hand, have taken up the professorial cane and presumably are teaching the natives how to behave in Yale, is
I'm,
it?
I'm loving it. Yeah, loving it. And teaching in person. So we've got, I guess, 12 students sitting in a room with masks on and the windows
But,
open. Pretty
but
cold.
I mean, how can you be loving it? I mean, you are absolutely the sort of last romantic man of action that you'd read about in a, what's his name, G.S. Hardy or G.T. Hardy sort of novel, aren't you? Sort of steward of the empire sort of thing. You're that sort of character, aren't you? I mean,
So I missed that. And I was in Afghanistan in November and I was in Jordan about 2 weeks ago. So I'm still doing a bit of travel. And probably we're going to move our family back to the Middle East at the end of the year. Because
where?
like my children are 6 and 3, and I'd love to give them a chance to learn Arabic. And I was very
Well,
lucky. I grew up in Malaysia and Hong Kong, and I felt it was a real help for my whole life to have a chance to live in another culture, learn other languages, and have those memories for me. So I'd like to try to give the same to the children.
but let me just go into that. I mean, for those watching, I mean, this is an extraordinary life. I mean, you're born in, was it Hong Kong?
Yeah.
Raised in Malaya, Hong Kong, the UK. Your dad was a spy. Well, he was MI6. He was a colonial officer in the classic thing, and you grow up in this sort of, when we talked earlier, and I made a reference, and you said I made a reference to Peter Armstrong's amazing book, The Great Game, which is one of the great books. And you said it was more Kipling. You grew up believing all of that. Do you still believe that?
I think I've finally grown up, but it took me a long time to grow up. I kept these fantasies going, these kind of childhood fantasies going well into my 30s. I think I finally reached midlife and I finally realized that the kind of things I guess that we all eventually realize when we hit midlife. But I kept it going for longer than most. And I think a lot of what I did in Afghanistan and Iraq and my my life until I was in my mid 30s was driven by these things. And what really changed me was walking across Asia. I took nearly 2 years off to walk alone, 20, 25 miles a day across Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. And I think that gave me the time and the space to settle and escape from some of those fantasies. But I probably sensed a little bit what, probably English public school boys had been brought up to believe before the First World War. And a lot of those dreams, which of course they had smashed to pieces in that war. But Bob, you're interested.
Stay with me.
Yeah.
You're more than that, though, aren't you? I mean, you are, in my head, this romantic figure. I mean, you're eminently capable. You're put in charge of a whole province post-war Iraq. You served in Malaya. You served where else was it? Iran or something? And you decide to go walking around Pakistan, New Guinea, Iran, Afghanistan. It's almost like you're more like a D.H. Lawrence figure. And I would suggest that in the same way that he felt betrayed by authorities, that at some point you felt the same sense of betrayal, that what you felt these people needed from your understanding of walking through them and living with them had been betrayed. The promise had been betrayed. And most recently in Hong Kong, where Britain, who can, let's face it, have no influence over the Chinese, but have essentially decided to pass on that now, and it's all done, and forego the people there. I mean, they say from brilliantly accepting as many of them as they possibly can who want to come. But other than that, I mean, are you a cynic now? Has Britain betrayed you?
I think in some ways I am a cynic, yeah. I think one of the problems is that whether in Afghanistan or in Iraq, or as you say, maybe even in places like Hong Kong, you implicitly take on a responsibility or an obligation towards people. You, particularly in these invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even earlier in my life when I worked on Bosnia and Kosovo, you go in and you talk a lot about democracy and human rights and how you're going to bring economic development, and all these tens of thousands of soldiers turn up and hundreds of billions of dollars are spent. But in the end, of course, the foreigners go home and they leave people. And at the beginning, they pretend somehow they're going to be with you, staying with you, they're going to see you through this. But they don't stay. And for good reasons as well as bad. But I think that's something very, very fundamental, which is that whatever the contract is, and maybe this is something we can get onto when we talk about international development, the contract between the government that's doing development in Ethiopia or Malawi or Tanzania and the people is not the kind of understanding or obligation that you have to your own family or maybe even to your own country. It's not something that the other person can really rely on. And that's probably one of the things that makes these relationships often seem quite short-term and fragile and transactional, and why there's not much trust out there. But let me just come to you for a second. A couple of things. One of them, your own life. So we were talking a little bit about this, and you've portrayed me as somebody who's grown up in Malaysia and Hong Kong without my television thinking about Kipling. You grew up in rural Ireland without a television. What was it that you were thinking about?
Not rural Ireland. I grew up in Dublin, in the suburb of Dublin.
And what did it feel like, age 11? What was your equivalent of Kipling? What were you looking to? What were your heroes? What were the values? What were the things that opened your life?
Well, I did read Biggles, you'd be glad to know, Rory, at the appropriate age. I can't remember now or then having heroic figures, people whom I aspired to. I encountered this sort of strange phenomenon, cliche-like, when I was reading about Mandela and subsequently met him. And it would be impossible not to have that person as a hero. It would just be impossible. And the great thing was that once I had met him and sort of got to know the man as much as I could, never once did that alter. He was as cool in reality as anything you'd imagine. So the big lodestar were always pop people, for the simple reason that they seemed to posit to a small boy at that time with nothing else going for himself, a different universe of possibility, other probabilities, that the world was not this one that you had, and it was not immutable, and it could change. And upon, seeing the Rolling Stones, it wasn't Mick or Keith, it was them, that insolence, and that not needing to even acknowledge another authority. So that was the period, with the Beatles, with their lack of deference, but so easy with it. Then the Rolling Stones' contemptuous insolence, all of that, like I'm going, yeah, that's right, and so that was it. And then what they were suggesting, I mean, this is terribly cliche, but what rock and roll was suggesting from the get-go struck me as being true, and still strikes me as being true, So I came of age at the perfect time of, Bob Dylan, the Stones, the Beatles, etc., the Who. And it was a time when they were defining exactly what the culture was and could be. So you can't imagine really the last quarter of the 20th century in the Western world without the Beatles. Contrary to what Boris Johnson might think about global Britain, it was actually the Beatles that taught the world to speak English, and not Shakespeare or anything else. And that has remained true to me and has worked out for me. I fell into being in rock and roll myself. It was like all of us in the band. It was accidental, but I was sort of working towards it, I guess. I was taking photographs of bands. I became ultimately the music editor of an underground paper in Canada. And so gradually you're working towards some sort of center. And once I'd landed on a stage in Dublin and Halloween night, 1975, the cliche is it felt like coming home. It didn't. It felt like freedom in the apocalypse now thing. It felt very different. It felt like I can do this, and this is maybe something that I can seriously do. And I was able to use it. So,
But do you think in some way you'd been preparing for it? So maybe that 11-year-old boy who'd been watching films of the Stones or the Beatles had, over the next 10 years, in a way, taken on a lot of what it meant to be one of them, to understand what it meant to be, to use your words, insolent, what it meant to be sexy, what it meant to have a vision of the world, so that when you were on that stage, you had already inhabited for 10 years the whole world. It felt natural to you because you were already part of it in your mind?
It's not as simple as that. The Ireland of the 60s and 70s was really cut off from the rest of the world. The improbable microstate of Luxembourg somehow filtered through this golden thread of truth that I clasped onto and have held onto fervently ever since. But there was really nothing going on. And it was a very oppressive society, claustrophobic. There was this almost agreed silence, national silence about everything that was wrong and corrupt politically and socially in the state, which has all come to the fore subsequently. And while you groped around for it, I found the response for me and in me and my two sisters' lives was circumscribed and pretty hopeless, forward-thinking way. So this other language, whether it was as simple as Little Richard's a wop bop a lop bam boom, that inarticulate scream of rage and anger, incoherent anger. And you could hear that, as I said to you, in Tierra del Fuego or Vladivostok, and you'd understand, as I said, this sort of perfect articulate form of inarticulacy that rock and roll is. And then subsequently it gets unpicked by unlikely geniuses from Liverpool, two guys who end up in the same wonderful band, or just an instinctive no. There used to be a CND poster. I shared a bedroom with my dad, and on my side of the room, there was just behind on the wall of the bed, there was just a big CND poster with the bomb in very stark architectural type paper, the nuclear bomb, and just underneath the word no. And that would have summed up me pretty much, maybe still does. And those things were articulated through rock and roll. And when the Rats came around, I was able to talk about things that bothered me. I guess they must have bothered others because they suddenly go into the top 10. And you bring that to a head with things like Live Aid. My life is very straightforward. You decide to go wandering off around Afghanistan and Pakistan. The logistics of that have always bothered me. What exactly, you do 20, 25 miles. Did you know there was another village up the road? I mean, did you have maps and stuff?
I didn't have good maps, but I'd talk to the village that I was staying in, and I'd tell them the direction I was walking in, where I wanted to end up. So I'd have a map of the country, so I'd know eventually in 10 days' time, 15 days' time, I needed to be at a particular city. And in some of these communities, particularly rural Afghanistan, a lot of people walk. So I'd have these funny conversations where people would say, where have you come from? And I'd say, I've come from Herat, which is sort of 250 miles away. It would be like, I don't know, walking into Sheffield and saying you just come from Glasgow or something, you walked from Glasgow. But in Afghanistan, people would say, oh, how long did it take you? And I'd say, oh, it took me 11 days. And they'd say, oh, my grandfather did it in 9. Right? So clear sense.
But was it dangerous to carry maps? I mean, how active were the Taliban at the time?
Very active at that time, but completely thrown off balance. So I started walking across Afghanistan just after 9/11, just after the invasion. So there wasn't an Afghan government. The Taliban were in disarray because this invasion had happened with the US troops. I got into trouble with them towards the end of the journey. But in a lot of the areas I went into, they had gone through and they'd burnt villages. So I was walking through burnt villages where the Taliban had burnt on the way out and left. And refugees were beginning to come back and society was kind of reforming. In other places, it was almost as though nothing had happened. People had been, there was a real sense in a way that you don't have when you walk in England or Scotland of people all descended from a single great-grandfather who'd been living there for 400, 500 years, who'd say that's the mountain over which Genghis Khan walked. That's, this is where so-and-so is buried. This is where in the 19th century we did this. And they could recite their ancestors back. One of them recited ancestors 28 generations straight back off the top of his head.
Yeah, but that's a necessity. You'll find that in many, especially in nomadic peoples, the last thing they want to carry around is books. So, this seems, I'm sure, laboured to an Irish audience, but the tradition in Ireland was of storytellers, very like in Africa. And many a time in evening, people will gather around the tree underneath and the storyteller will do a story. And it's very like when you read your kids a bedtime story, you better repeat the same thing in precisely the same way. So the kids go, no, and you've got to go back and repeat it. And it's the Bible, Jehoshaphat begat of so-and-so, begat of so-and-so. That's how history is relayed. The unfortunate thing is it becomes a series of Chinese whispers after a point, and they end up, thinking weird stuff. But when you were walking through the places, how fluent were you in the local language?
I spoke, I guess, the way that maybe a recently arrived Uber driver in London would speak English. I mean, I could have a conversation, I could chat to you, but I'd be making a whole series of errors in the grammar.
How many stars would you get at the end of your visit? So when you pitch up, would you just knock door to door to say, "Can I stay here the night, please?"
So it's an incredibly polite society. Much more.
When you show up, do they think you're an American soldier? One. Do you just knock on the first door or what?
No, I've been told before I come to the village that in this particular place in Kamenge, I need to be looking for a man called Komandan Mualem Haji Maksenhan Kamenji, who's the figure that the village 10 miles away thinks is a sort of generous big man who's going to be likely to want to put me up. And I knock on the door and I say, "Hello, my name is Rory Stewart, and I have walked from Dawlatiya, where I stayed with Abdul Rauf Ghafoori. And before that, I was in Sangizat, where I stayed with Bashir Khan. Before that, I was with Mir Ali Yazdan Bakhsh in Yakolam. And now I'm with you." And then this thing starts where he will say, "Assalamu alaikum, chatorastid, hubastid, bakherastid, hanahariatas, mandarabashi, zindabashi," which means, "How are you? May you not be tired. Long life to you. May your soul flourish." And I have to reply to each one of those questions and ask the question back. And this can go on for quite a long time. And then when you get into the guest room, every single man in that room, because often people will have seen you from the roof of the house before you arrive and they will have gathered, will ask the same set of questions. So you'll be doing this very elaborate, "How are you?" maybe a dozen times, and then you sort of lapse into silence.
And then he invites you in?
Then he'll invite you in, and often in a very moving way. I mean, I was attacked in Bamiyan, somebody hit me in the face, and I was walking along very angry and bewildered, and about 3 hours into the walk, a man stepped out of his house, not somebody I was planning to try to call on, and said, come in, and he lit a fire, and he laid out a bed for me, and he apologized there wasn't any meat, and he brought me some rice, and only after I'd been in his house for an hour and a half did he ask me who I was or where I was going.
And were you introduced to the women, or were you put in a room?
Never saw any women. In Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, a little bit in Nepal, a little bit in central Bamiyan, tiny bits of India, but basically speaking, I sat with men. And in Afghanistan, always with men.
So what do you think went wrong?
In Afghanistan?
Everywhere. I mean, why are we pouring money into Pakistan when, clearly they loathe us and the military, are playing games and stuff like that? What went wrong? I mean, Afghanistan you're never going to conquer it. It's untamable. We keep messing. But you're an interventionist, aren't you?
I think it's something that we can understand more in the age of Donald Trump or Brexit. Because in the end, what went wrong was nationalism, cultural values. Basically, ultimately, it was too easy to convince many, many Afghans that they didn't want foreigners, Christians, soldiers in their country. And the way in which policymakers, many academics, many kind of UN diplomats think is very economical. They in terms of money all the time. So they keep thinking, if we only just create jobs, if we get these schools going, if we get these clinics going, it'll all be fine. It's like people who think that the reason people vote Brexit or vote for Donald Trump is because they're poor. So if you could only do a great regeneration project in the northeast of England or in the Rust Belt in America, somehow the whole problem would be solved. But that's not true of the way that people think. It's not true, for example, of Scottish nationalism, which is something I think about a lot. In the end, there's something which is very difficult to put your finger on and which you can't really see from the outside about somebody's history, their identity, their culture, which makes it quite easy for people who are against you to stir people up against you. And it can't be reduced. And so you're stuck in that stupid kind of Life of Brian situation of, you know, what have the Romans ever done for you apart from the roads and this and that and the other? And you're sort of missing the point that really isn't what this is about, any more than that really was an answer for liberation movements in Africa. Where, you know, often African leaders in the first generation were very clear. They said, okay, maybe we're going to end up in the short term being poorer, but we want to be free.
So you're walking out your Kipling-esque upbringing, and you're beginning to understand a completely different set of rules to that which you had imbibed from a child. Do you still, given that you were, you know, actually the colonial administrator of, you know, post-war province in Basra, and again, like, you must have been almost like living a movie with these leaders, these clan leaders around you, etc. But you are an interventionist still, aren't you?
In a very, very, very prudent, moderate way. I mean, I think you can make differences in a small way. So behind me are some trays and wood that we've produced. My wife and I have a charity in Afghanistan and in Myanmar and Burma, and working with Syrian refugees in Jordan. And we've restored the center of the old city of Kabul, and we've got a clinic, and we've got a primary school, and we've been doing this for 15 years. And the craftspeople produce these things, and we sell them around the world. So I believe that there are things that as a foreigner you can do respectfully, usefully. But what matters to me is it's a very long-term relationship. We're working with the same community we were working with 15 years ago. And we've kept it very small, and we work under those buildings. And, you know, I've seen children that were in our primary school 15 years ago who are now studying to be craftspeople. And that's sort of what I understand.
That's a personal endeavor. But when you were in Iraq, you were the representative of the British government. At that point, had you drunk the Kool-Aid? Did you agree with the invasion?
At first, I thought we could make a difference, yeah. So at first, I thought the problem was that we'd been doing these things wrong. So I had all these theories of what had gone wrong, because I'd worked in Bosnia, I'd worked in Kosovo, I'd worked in Afghanistan, these other interventions. So I arrived in Iraq and I thought, okay, I've learned the lessons from these places. And the lesson is you need to be much closer to local people. You need to focus on learning local languages. You need to spend time sitting in people's houses. You need to make it very granular and local and get away from all the jargon and really work with the texture of society. In the end, it turned out that that didn't work either. It was in the end, well, actually not in the end. I mean, it took me about 2-3 weeks in Iraq to conclude the whole thing was a complete mess and that it was mad. I mean, there was no way that a 29-year-old British man should have been trying to govern a province in Iraq. And that people misunderstood this, that often people would say, well, particularly Americans, because they think every problem has a solution. You know, is the problem that you don't have enough people? It's a problem you don't have enough money? Or is it you? Maybe if we swapped you for some other 50-year-old American, it would be better. And I was trying to say, no, the problem is us, just us. You know, the United States, Britain, who we are is the problem. It's not, there's a madness that took over those generals and diplomats and people, which maybe wasn't completely visible, but from 2001 till probably 2011 after 9/11, they really believed it was possible that these places were an existential threat to global security, and somehow you could make them into democracies and you could transform the economies and you'd make everybody better off and that you could eliminate corruption and you could build states. And it's obviously completely mad, but it was not mad to those people. I mean, they sat in a world spending, in the end, $2 trillion.
So were you fired?
Was I fired in the end? No, I sort of fired myself from the very end of it.
And did the Americans have any idea what you were talking about when you went through your existential angst over your job?
It was very strange. I worked with a guy called Richard Holbrooke on Obama's advice team in Afghanistan in 2008. And I, advised Hillary Clinton, and I did stuff with John Kerry and things. This is all before I got into Parliament. So this is going back 15 years. And what it kept coming back to is they would keep saying, okay, Rory, you keep giving us problems. Give us the solutions. Right? And in the end, my insight was this. I said this to Hillary Clinton. I said, it's like you're saying to me, I want to drive off a cliff. Should I wear a seatbelt? And I say, don't drive off a cliff. And they say, well, that decision's already made. Should we wear a seatbelt or not? And I'd go, I guess by all means wear a seatbelt. And then they'd be, we've consulted with policy expert Rory Stewart, and he has advised us to wear a seatbelt.
Having said that, sometimes an intervention will work, as in, for example, former Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Blair laid out that particular politics in that speech in Chicago.
Yeah.
On interventionism.
Yeah.
And you're left with the sense that if you are aware that this appalling shower of crooks are massacring their own people or killing their own people, and you can do something, you can send gunships, and come back to Kipling or Palmerston. Do you do it, or do you just sit by and watch it on your telly every night? See, that's the problem. So what do you do? Now, with regard to China, imprisoning Hong Kong, obviously Britain could do very little in the world anymore except be a nuisance. But I mean, what exactly do you do? Do you choose, well, we can do the small guys because we're bigger, but we can't do the bigger guys. It's impossible. So
it's not a moral theory, is it? It's the way I think about it is that ought implies can. You don't have a moral obligation to do what you can't do. You have to begin with being realistic about what you can do. Right? That it's not.
But would you?
If I take you, Bob. I mean, if you were walking down the street and you saw some, 10 gigantic people up to no good, and you suddenly thought, okay, I'm going to take them all on, right? Yeah, in a way that's heroic. In a way it's noble, but it's not really achieving very much, is it?
No.
You've got to begin from the practical sense of what difference can make. And let me flip it around to you, because I think the closer you are to a particular place, the more obvious the problems become. Let's take you're running a winery in Ethiopia, right? You're making wine in Ethiopia. And so from the surface, from the outside, it looks like here is Bob Geldof doing a private sector-led development program in Ethiopia. And this is absolutely what you're theoretically meant to be doing. And it's going to generate jobs and incomes and transform poverty. And this is the model for development, okay? Now tell us what it's really like, what's actually happening. How does it, what do people not understand about doing something like that on the ground? Take your winery.
Well, it's a big deal because Ethiopians are big wine drinkers. 60% of the population are Christian, 40% are Muslim. They've always been able to, muscle along together. If a Christian man marries a Muslim woman, the first child is Christian, the second Muslim. If a Muslim man marries a Christian woman, the first child is Muslim, the second Christian. Very elegant. And the Christians drink and they like their beer and they like their wine. And the two big, there's two big brands of wine. Unfortunately, the name of the winery is called Awash. And can I say it's aptly named because the vineyards run alongside the river Awash. And there's a couple of 100 hectares of vineyards. And us lot were always getting fed up being called naive pop stars, that they know nothing, it's just about age. And so, no, we were always going on about, it has to be balanced with trade and the two combined can grow an economy. And that's true. And it has to be appropriate to the logic of that country, as you've just been saying. So when Ethiopia eased up, opened up more, they began to sell off state industries. And one of the state industries was this wineries. So I had started a private equity fund. I'd raised $200 million to invest in companies in Africa to prove the model. It's no real use there's two types classically of African companies, one at the mom and pop level and one at the super mega international Unilever level. Diageo, Guinness, Unilever, Shell, that, which does put tax into the country, but really, you know, you need the middle level. Like everything, you need the middle class, you need a middle level income, because then government can tax regular income. With that money, they can have a judiciary, they can have a police force, they can have a constitution that works. And so you get a state, you get a functioning state. Real simple, it's not difficult, this stuff. And aid will stabilize the society. Charity will be that great essential human act of an individual reaching out and saying, you know what, dude, let me give you a hand up here. So that's the euro or the buck or the pound in the Oxfam box or the whatever box. That'll stabilize, hopefully, an individual. Bilateral aid or just aid that would stabilize a community at a very, very basic level, probably basic health, basic education, basic agriculture. But there's nothing in between. That can't grow. You educate someone, where's the jobs? How does development happen? So the key, in my amateur way, but one summer Bono and I got these individual lectures from Amartya Sen, the great Nobel economist, and Joe Stiglitz, the great Nobel economist, on the phone, etc., etc. But, you know, if you're going to meet leaders, you better know your stuff, because all the advisors know theirs, and quickly you look a bit of a prat. Never bothered me that much, but there you go. And so we raised the money. I got private equity guys, experts, not me, to source out the companies that look good around the $15 to $25 million bracket. Mm-hmm. And we bought them and restructured them. And I suppose the name of the company is 8 Miles. 8 Miles is the shortest distance between the richest continent in the world and the poorest. And that's ridiculous. In that baleful gap is all our potential future hope. And we will do business, because there's, you know, 1.4 billion people going to be the population of Africa by 2030 sort of thing. There'll be something like $30 trillion entering the consumer marketplace in the continent of Africa by 20x, well, 30 or 35, etc., etc. All that's great. So we were looking at consumer goods. So yes, kids want education. Yes, they want health, but they also want Nike and iPhones. So we were looking at biscuits, you know, things like that. Wine.
You, but I mean, I love it, but you're still giving us the theory. I'd love to get a sense of the texture of how it goes wrong. What's actually happened to your winery? What are the problems?
It's doing hugely. It's doing really well. We employ about 500 people. Across Africa, we employ about 10,000. But that immediately affects 150,000 people with a stable life, a regular income, you know, that government can make regular tax, but kids can go to school, yada, 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 yada. So, but I mean, I still do Band-Aid every day of the week, and that's one part. But there's three parts to this thing. The other is politics, and the rest is investment. The truth is that doing business in Africa is extremely difficult. And to be an investor, you've got to take a big risk. You know, you've got to want to. So a lot of people want to just help. But for example, the problem with the wineries is there's 2 wineries in Addis, and then the vineyards are about 2 hours north. And so, yes, you put in the clinic, you put in the better housing, you clean up the river, and you've got clean water so the kids don't get sick. You have a small school, etc., etc. You bring in proper trade unions. You train up the locals so they go into the management. Like anywhere else, there's brilliant people. Yeah. There's not. Yeah. The problem comes in a nascent economy with the international currencies of investment and dollars. So, for example, in Ethiopia, because even though they're growing at average 9 to 10% per annum and have done for the last 10 years, which is huge growth, but from a very low base. So if you're at 0 and you grow 10%, you know, if you're the United States and you grow at 0.5%, it's enormous. So in Ethiopia, there's very little that they have up to now been exporting. So they're not earning dollars. So when you want corks for your bottles, when you want bottles for your bottles, when you want the new plant for the alcohol pops or the grape juice you're about to do, you've got to get it in Germany. It arrives and they want to be paid. You've no dollars. You've only got the local currency called beer. The Germans won't take beer. So you queue up at the bank for Forex, foreign exchange, for dollars, and you're put on a list. And you try and get up the list. You say, here's my, look, the stuff is at the docks. I need it now. And they will shift you up according to urgency, but they're very limited how much they have.
So I suppose what I was trying to do is take that beautiful story you've told, where you've connected the theory about meeting the middle in your conversations with Amartya Sen, all the way back to, I'm trying to get corks for my bottles and I haven't got the foreign exchange and I'm queuing up at the bank. Because I think that's a way of trying to make people understand how unbelievably difficult it is to do anything well anywhere. And it's very difficult to do something well in Ireland or Britain. But it's even more difficult to do it in another person's country where you don't necessarily speak the language.
But it's possible, Rory. We're just about to exit two companies. One is a chemical plant which we bought during the revolution in Egypt, which I was going, are you sure? I mean, these generals, I don't get it. But this was a brilliantly run company by two brothers. And we bought in and, you know, it's at least 40% up this year alone. I mean, even in the years of the revolution, they're exporting to the Middle East, they're exporting to Germany, paint, house paint, etc., etc. Bought a bank in Uganda. We're just about to sell that for about third tier bank, you know, to farmers and stuff like that. That, you know, sometimes the debts just aren't repaid, but it's a proper big bank. And, you know, you build it up. This is what PE does. And I wanted capitalism red in tooth and claw to be seen to work in, you know, so if you're trying to persuade the American president, please, the Chinese are everywhere. They've put billions into this. They're making it work. Where are you guys? Do you want Africa to be owned by the Chinese? You know, well, we're giving X amount. Forget that. That's one area, you know, and, you know, you have been for 10 years a British politician. It's the oddest thing in the world. Here you are running these invasion countries. Here you are wandering around romantically, chatting to them and getting the plot that this isn't going to work at all. And then, you know, it must be your Kipling-esque upbringing about like public service, duty, Eton, Dragon School, you know, Oxford, all that. I mean, you decide to enter as are you still a conservative?
No, I'm an independent now. I've been booted out of the party over Brexit.
You know, I know, yeah. But I mean, why, given the drama of your life, the excitement, the adventure of it, and the romance of it. I mean, I envy it so much, to be honest with you. How could you just focus it down to Penrith and the borders and sitting in the House of Parliament? At this point, I really must recommend everyone watching this to go to YouTube and watch the debate in the House of Commons on the Human Rights Act from Brussels, and watch Rory Stewart debating Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is an object lesson in the beauty of the language for a start, and the clarity of thought. It's a wonderful thing to watch. And if you look at the chain after it, say, why can't politics be like that? But it can't, Rory. You know, you were in the Oxford Union that day, weren't you?
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. I had very unrealistic expectations of politics. And I thought it was a wonderful way of serving my country, and it would involve great speeches in the House of Commons and really working with my constituents to transform their lives. And I thought I could do other things I cared about as a prisons minister.
Yeah, but you went off walking around your constituency, around Scotland, then you decide to, as you're kicked out the Tories because you're a Remainer. What happened in that second debate? What happened?
I just despaired about, you know, I'm there against Boris and Jeremy Hunt, Michael Gove, and I'd done quite well in the first debate, so I thought I was on a bit of a roll. I was briefly ahead in the opinion polls, But suddenly I realized in that room, the first question I think that really, well, there were two questions. First, the interviewer said, well, we're not really going to make this about Brexit. I thought, whoa. Right, this is the biggest subject at the time, and that's where I really disagree with Boris Johnson, and I can really lay into him. Then they moved on, and the first question was, which taxes are you going to cut? Right? Well, maybe not the first, but a very early question. And I said, well, I'm not going to cut any taxes. I mean, we're in a, I think we're going to move out of austerity. We're going to have to raise taxes, And I suddenly saw all my colleagues turn and look at me as I'd gone completely mad. And then they all gave little speeches about cutting taxes. And from then onwards, I was sort of struggling to hit the right thing.
But then, no. Then you decide to be the London mayor. And your great whiz-bang scheme is to walk around London and stay with people for a week. Were they random people or people who came to your social media sites and stay with
people emailed? I got nearly, I think, 6,500 emails with long emails describing why I should come and stay with them, why it was interesting.
And what's it interesting?
It was amazing. Unbelievably amazing. I mean, incredible. I stayed in
Rory,
an elderly women's commune up in North London. I stayed on someone's floor out in Stratford. I stayed with a guy whose parents were from Nigeria on his sofa just off the Wandsworth Road. I mean, I had an incredible range of different.
What does your wife say to all this gallivanting and all that,
It's pretty awful for her. I mean, because it's incredibly. I mean, what you realize when you're not with a political party, if you try to be an independent, you're doing it all yourself. It's like you're trying to fight the battle of Trafalgar and build the boat at the same time. You have to raise all the money. And of course, you're raising money from people who often don't agree with you. It's different with a charity. With my charity in Afghanistan, if you say to me, yeah, Rory, very interesting, all this traditional craft stuff you're doing, but what I really want you to do is manufacture plastic buckets. Right? I can say, thank you very much, Bob. I don't want your money and I'm going to go somewhere else. Right? But you feel under so much pressure. These other parties are spending £4 million, right?
Rory, can I come back to the granular? You're staying on a sofa in Eltham or somewhere. This is London. Like, they don't care. Like, it will chew you up and eat you out. I mean, Johnson goes in because he's lied his way into it. I mean, how many times has Boris Johnson lied to you?
Well, he's done some lovely ones there, but he's such an amazing liar. I mean, I'm fascinated by him because he's incredibly charming about it. So his great one is when he was running the first time for the leadership, he called me in and he said, Rory, don't believe anything that I'm about to say, but I would love to have you in my cabinet. I can see you traveling around the world, sprinkling English eau de cologne in every foreign capital, which was a sort of extraordinary way of doing it, because you leave the room thinking, he wants to have me in his cabinet. And then you're thinking, but on the other hand, he just said, don't believe anything that I'm about to say.
But do you think he knows? Do you think he knows he's lied? I mean, I've talked to, I won't name the ministers, who he wanted to support him in his leadership bid. Yeah. Of course, you know them. Yeah. And he just lied boldly to their face. I mean, many said, are you going to preserve the Department for International Development, of which you were the minister, the Secretary of State? And he said, absolutely, we're so proud of it. Then another said, you know that you have to preserve 0.7 in internet, the monies that everyone fought so hard for, and which was, in terms of soft power, in terms of the image of the country, in terms of 100% of Parliament and all the newspapers and the polls endorsing this, he goes, it's safe in my hands. And of course, almost immediately.
But I mean, I understood this from the beginning. I mean, I didn't remotely believe him when he said he wanted to protect the 0.7% or stop DFID from being merged. I assumed that he would do this.
But then how can England be trusted, ever?
Well, because he's... I mean, I obviously didn't feel he could, which is why I ran in the leadership.
You're a Brit. He's not. He doesn't understand Britain. He's an Englishman. He's a hardcore national. He actually is, and it's a sort of comic book thing. It's like he hasn't passed the Kipling-esque thing. I mean, he's a chancer, isn't he? as the Irish say.
There's a lovely thing which maybe you remember where Marx, talking about Napoleon III, says history repeats itself. You know, first time is tragedy, second time is farce. And I think that's the sense that he's, and maybe other people too, from that sort, are on the surface, they're sort of living out a 19th century idea of being British, but they're nothing like a 19th century, even Englishman, right? They're a sort of comic book version, as you say. They don't actually have the same values. They don't have the same code. I mean, they're just, it's true that he can quote Latin poetry and they could quote Latin poetry, but the difference is they sort of believed in that. He doesn't. He's, but he is an amazing person. I mean, I'm sort of mesmerized by him because he is, because of who he is, because of the kind of way that you and I are talking about him, he has been told all his life from when he was a small child, you can't behave like that, you can't get away with that, you can't tell lies like that, you're going to come to a sticky end. Everyone said it, his teachers said it to him, his bosses, the newspapers, he's fired from jobs a lot. But of course, from his point of view, he thinks, yeah, they're all wrong, aren't they? No, I'm Prime Minister, done all these things, and I'm Prime Minister. So and he's actually doing very well in the opinion polls, right? So I thought maybe I didn't think he handled COVID very well in the first few months. A lot of people died. I thought that would harm him. But actually, he's screaming ahead. So he's sort of got something in that smile, something in the way that he conducts himself seems to.
No, he's a naughty little boy, you know. That's his stick. Gosh, it's all this Beano. Gosh, cripes, Sabon, you know. Gosh, you know, like fuck off, you know. And I don't buy it for a second. The man is an inveterate liar. I mean, as you said, like.
But why do you think so many people in the public are so attracted by that Beano look?
I'll tell you why, Rory, and this is really odd. I've lived in England for most of my life, and, you know, English wife, English children, I owe practically everything to this country, you know, that I managed to do. And they're fascinating people, the English. I know you're Scots, but they're really odd. And essentially, they're anarchic. That's the real character trait, I think. And if you go back, whether it's Thatcher, whether it's Churchill, whether it's Francis Drake, whether it's Johnny Rotten, who is Irish, you know, but could use that thing. They are really scratch a little. And it's very odd that the up to now, hitherto, the perception has been that they're structured, that, you know, that they keep the tight rein and such. But that's because you scratch it. And if the tight rein in there, they're going fucking berserk. They've never, for a start, absolutely never understood Ireland. Never. And like one of the most revealing things about Brexit is that they're completely confounded that they must deal with a sovereign nation and their government. You can see that confusion. Did you feel that ever?
Well, it's amazing that. I mean, the lack of understanding of Ireland is extraordinary. I mean, it's a completely mad. And it was at the heart of what made this whole Brexit thing so strange to me. You know, I'd say, you know, I was trying to say, look, Brexit result has happened, so we should go for a very moderate, soft Brexit. Norway, Switzerland, this sort of thing. And they would say, you know, Brexiteers would say, well, you know, let's forget this Theresa May deal. We'll do another Canada deal. And I'd say, but if you do that, there will have to be a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Oh, no. We're not going to have to do that. And you can see that they're now still in denial. They're now basically saying we're not going to implement that border. I mean, they talk about only doing it temporarily, but they're breaking the entire agreement with the European Union.
Which is one of Johnson's lies. He agreed to it a year before any deal. Right. And now he's saying, well, it doesn't matter, exactly like his lies. He's going to be in trouble.
Except from his point of view, he always feels he can get away with it. Listen, Bob, I've just got it. We've not got long to go, but there's questions coming in. So somebody called Eileen Broderick's written in saying, you've both written about your fathers. How do they influence your life choices? Can you tell us something about your father?
Go ahead.
You want me to tell you about my father? Or are you going to tell me about your father? Okay.
Well, you go ahead. He was the sort of pillar of life, wasn't he?
Yeah, so I loved my father. Really loved him. He was 50 when I was born. He's this very sort of playful, strange person who played with me 3 hours every morning. Not really interested in anybody outside the family. Didn't really have friends, to be honest. his brother, who was only a year younger than him, being killed in the war. And he felt all his close friends had died in the Second World War. Very hard man. I mean, a kind of tough guy, sort of, you can imagine the sort of, well, he grew up he's a young man in the late 40s, early 50s. So sort of like Mad Men. He's the kind of guy who'd drink 3 martinis at lunch and wear these very kind of crisp 1940s, 1950s suits. But just the most wonderful father for me, because he was incredibly uncompetitive. There was no sense that he had an idea of what he wanted me to do, and he was very, very good at always giving me the impression that, that he loved me. Yeah. How about your father?
Well, I mean, your dad was MI6. He was a colonial officer, wasn't he? I mean, you lived in Malaya and Hong Kong, so that was probably a lot to do with your upbringing, you know. And we were the opposite. It was just our father, because I had two older sisters. The eldest one is dead, and there was no money. And the job, he had been a chef, quite a good chef. I mean, he was working the Queen Mary. He was in posh hotels, posh clubs, and that like that. But he knocked it on the head when he got married and during the war, because it was just too much of a faff. And he joined his brother. My grandfather had set up this business in Dublin, and my uncle ran it. And my dad joined him, and my dad sort of looked after the countryside, and my uncle the city. And you must imagine a completely different world to yours, Rory. I mean, Ireland in the 50s was really, really, I mean, specifically very different. And there was a historical logic to that. We were to be kept in some sort of Hibernianistic aspect around this perverse constitution that had been, you know, woven into reality by the then Archbishop of Dublin, or maybe Ireland, I don't know, and the Republican president. So, and for me, that was sort of the original sin of the state we were living in. It gave way to, it manufactured all sorts of perversities and corruptions out of it. One of which is we were never able to really move beyond a sort of ludicrous idea of some, social realist superhuman farmer, you know. But what Ireland did was we jumped the tech. We weren't allowed ever industrialized by the British. That happened in the north. So we were kept being the granary in effect for London. So we went from being an agricultural society into being a digital one in effect. My dad was at the sort of interregnum between this, and he worked the countryside where he was a very popular guy. He was a hail fellow, well met, very funny guy, but in a state of panic because there was no money. And he spent whatever he had trying to give myself and my two sisters some sort of education. He wasn't around. He'd leave on Monday, come back on Friday. Because there was no one to make me do my homework, I just read books from the school library and listened to, as I said, Radio Luxembourg and rock and roll, which was the lifeblood. Sad as that sounds, but I think it was for many people. It brought the outside world into you and those attitudes. And I suppose being the only boy, perhaps he was worried about me because of what happened after my mum died, and he invested too much sort of hope in me. And I wasn't doing anything work-wise, so it was very bad. It was very bad between us. What he wanted was just me to have a job, any job. I mean, when he was a young man, you just clung on to whatever gig you had. There was no, I leave and do this. That was it. If you had a job, fantastic. And the thing always was, do anything. There's dignity in any job. And that's true. You know, it doesn't matter what you are. You know, that's how you're getting through life. Well done, you know. And, but we were at that specific rupture moment that the 60s were. There wasn't a continuum. It wasn't like 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s. It was a complete rupture because the media age had happened and the world was arriving. And not just in Ireland, but everywhere. And so, as I said, these young boys and girls with guitars were talking of other possibilities. And whereas everything else was talking about just take a job, just do as you're told, just shut up. I used to wear a badge in school that said, be silent, consume, die. And of course, take that off, Geldof. What does it mean? Take it off? Well, I prefer to get out, so it was always that. And it was crap. It was crap. Did I love him? No, not in those years. I was afraid of him, I think. I don't know what I felt. He'd come home and he'd try and it's awful. I feel so bad about it now. He'd try and have a relationship. And his way of doing that, because it was his day off too, we'd go, he'd take me down to his mate's boat and he'd take me out sailing. Sailing in Ireland is fucking freezing. It's a grey sea, and I'd be with these 40-year-olds who were ancient, and then we go to the pub and we'd have a pint and I'd have my Britvic orange and I'd go home, but Saturday I want to be with my mates. So it just didn't work. None of it worked. And it got worse and worse. And I had to cover my tracks all the time about being banned school until they were uncovered and all hell broke loose. And it was crap. It was grim, really. And then so long as I just left, I just had to go and work out my own world. By definition, you are forced to become entrepreneurial. And the key to this idea, whether it's Branson or whether it's Bill Gates, whether it's Churchill, crap in school, kind of usually. You need to create an own universe in which you can function, because the one you're handed just doesn't work for you. So you need somehow to go and make this own world, and then other people come in to facilitate it and enable it. And so I went off and wandered around for ages doing any old job. And as I said, that day in Bolton Street College of Technology that night felt right, but so did writing in the newspaper in Canada, but I was on my way to the north of Canada to dig gold. That's what I was doing. That's why I went to Canada.
Well, can I just, this idea of you create a world and people come to it, you've been quite lucky. I mean, you've created a world, and ultimately I was most lucky because we never reconciled, my dad and I, but we came to completely understand each other quite early on, and I grew to love him very, very much. He became a great pal, which I'm really happy about. Yeah, so it ended up being like maybe what it was with your dad. Oh, that's lovely. I was just thinking about this thing about you creating a world and people coming to it. And in a way, your story is a very powerful one because you get into music at a time when music's very exciting. And in a way, as you say, that was really the story of the last quarter of the 20th century. And you were right in the heart of all of that. And it worked for you. But how does it feel for musicians who shared all your values, all your aspirations, all your dreams, but for whatever reason, maybe just luck, it didn't work? And how then does it feel if you're 70 years old and you've tried to be a musician, you've tried to create that world and you've hoped that people were going to come into it and they haven't quite come into it and that world hasn't quite stayed together? What's your sense of how that feels and how people get through that?
How would I possibly know, Rory? I sold millions of records, thousands screamed at me, giant stadiums filled at my arrival. How could I possibly get into that? Well, you gave it a shot, I mean, it's easier now. I mean, rock and roll, the age of rock and roll is over, in my view. It was certainly in my case, but definitely in my generation's case, it was the central spine of the culture. It was the means by which all ideas were translated and transmitted. And, you know, you cannot imagine the last quarter of the 20th century without your Bob Dylans and your Beatles. Through them came every social, cultural, political, economic, philosophical idea. You know, other worlds, like, you know, everyone goes on about George Harrison playing a sitar. What's that noise? You know, like, or wearing those clothes. It was, you know, everything. And it was facilitated by the first globalization, which was the media world, which I was able to grab a hold of for Live Aid. And the key to that was watching the Beatles in school do All You Need Is Love on the first link up, Telstar link up, you know, and the wow, and the romance of that. That's not true now. So from the first vital signs of the, you know, when you consider that it was 1956, Elvis, Little Richard, and the American Imperium is now global. And there's a new invention, a transistor, and all those boys wanted to hear this new thing. And this new thing was about a beautiful young white boy raging that he was not allowed into this thing we saw on the films and television in their case, which was dad with his hat and pipe and mom, blonde, and the boy and girl behind them in the huge Chevrolet driving into the forever future. He wasn't allowed in. He was poor white trash, living alongside, even worse, a young, beautiful black guy who was gay and who also was saying, I want in, but not even getting a foot in the door of television because he was black, and even though beautiful. So you get Little Richard, you get Elvis doing his, you know, dancing, which, you know, absolutely outraged everyone. So there's a big question now. And then you get Little Richard, just this vast scream of rage. Wow, bubble up, bubble up. And as I said to you, whether you're in Vladivostok or Tierra del Fuego, you go, fuck yeah, you know, and you just understand it. So the lingua franca of the world stopped being English or Mandarin or Spanish, and it became pop. And so, again, I was able to utilize that, I suppose, in Live Aid and Live 8. So it is a seriously important thing, but it ends when you get the advanced media age, which is the digital age. Now those messages have become diluted because of the diffusion of the medium. So the diffusion of the media has meant the dilution of the message. So you still have fantastic rock and roll. You still have great singers and great writers, but it cannot have the same cultural or personal impact as it did then. That's coming through all other means. And so you can, to answer the first part of your question, you, Rory, even at this late stage of your life, can download an instrument, can download an entire studio, can assemble a song in seconds and put it out there free on Spotify. But when art has got no value, it is valueless. When art is free, it doesn't have a nominal value. And of course, all values are illusory. But when you have to pay, when you have to get the bus, save up your pocket money, achieve a physical object, go back clutching it and put it on, and possibly get pulled because you actually have that fucking the physical artifact, then it's got value. Not now. It doesn't. You just go free. Oh, what's that? Okay, free, free, free. So far less jobs in rock and roll. A kid can go and make a few tracks. They probably won't make it. And now, thanks to Brexit, all British acts can really no longer tour on the continent because this government turned down the EU offer to have reciprocity. So one of the key things about touring, of course, is your carnets and your visas, which were obviated by the EU. But if you take something called cabotage, which is when truck drivers, you need to have trucks. Under regulations now, a truck driver can only make 2 stops in 1 week before returning home. So touring for a young British artist is over. And so a $90 billion industry per annum will now collapse. They are so fucking stupid, this shower of wankers.
We've got 5 minutes, I guess, left. And somebody in the chat, we've got these audience questions coming in saying, do you see yourself as an optimist or a pessimist? So can I give that to you, your last one?
No, you're the optimist. You know.
Me, I don't know what I am. I'm very worried about this because I believe in the end, you have to be an optimist, that extreme pessimism is giving up on life. It's a form of despair. It's a form of giving up on your obligations. But I struggle because my experience of politics was brutal. I came out of 10 years of it feeling that it was bad for my brain, bad for my soul, bad for my mind. I came out with really negative feelings towards a lot of my colleagues. I realized that I burnt all my boats. Conservative Party had become an independent. There's no route back for me into politics. I failed to run as Mayor of London. I've tried all these different things in my life. And some of them, as you suggested yourself, are not really the spine of the late 20th century. They were the spine of the late 19th century. And it doesn't really work to, there's just too much anachronism. It's too much out of time, a lot of that stuff. So now I'm very lucky. My health, I'm writing, I'm teaching, I'm going to travel, I'm going to move to the Middle East. But do I have a vision for myself of what the next 20 years of my life is going to be? I'm not 50 yet. I should have a whole new life ahead of me. I don't see what it is. And do I have a vision for what the world is going to be? Do I know what the world's going to be in 2040, 2050? And now I'm very worried. I go to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. I see 85% youth unemployment. I talk to these kids who've left their villages. They're 15, 16 years old. They're trying to make it as models or as musicians. And obviously they can't make it. And they're turning to prostitution. They're turning to crime. They're starving. They don't want to go back to their villages. I don't know what the future is for that place. So I believe that good people are optimists. The answer is to be an optimist. Spiritually, you must be an optimist. But I struggle to find that in reality. Over to you to finish this.
I don't think I'm an optimist. I can work myself up into a pessimism, but what I'm for is change. Permanence is illusory, and you're talking about the 15, 20-year-olds in Tanzania. We can talk about the 15, 20-year-olds in Great Britain with the economy that they're going to inherit. It is awful. It is awful. And and then you'd be codding yourself if you thought, well, there'll be all these new industries, creative destruction. Ideas are the raw material of change. And I love ideas. And, you've just outlined a very negative view of your life, standing aside from your life, look at what you've done. It's exceptional. So, and you're in a constant sort of learning process, it seems to me. I'm not like that. People come or you read something and you conjure up ideas and change can happen. But change can be good or bad, but it is only good when it meets the needs and is balanced by the requirements of society. And so we're in a period of great flux now. And a new economy on the back of the digital age has erupted, and we don't understand exactly what it is. And as a result, politics comes behind a logical period of economic development. There is a new economy, entirely new. You can't imagine it like you're doing it right now. How do you manage that? That will be the new politics. And just like you can say that maybe Darwin, Freud, and Marx wrote the 20th century, but that only became apparent in the 1950s, so too, this century has been written. It's just they don't know it, and we don't know which are the biblical tones of our time. But we will go on. We must come up with some form of answer to climate change, boring as that is. It must be done. We're just about within a narrow gauge of being able to do that. We'll probably see a 2% rise in fact, 95% of the scientists believe we'd see 2% by 2030, 2040. If that happens, then around the equator will become uninhabitable and people will move to find resources. And, talking about sustainability on a finite planet is pretty weird, but hope is not a plan, Rory. So, but hope can be made practical. And that's what interests me, this is a problem. Change is coming, love that. What sort of change? A whole new economy. And America's floundering with this, because it was the old imperium. But there will be a new politics. There will be, and you can see it now. Brexit is, a reaction to this. Europe is not the new politics. Europe needs to be profoundly restructured, top to bottom. But it needs to exist. So I wish I were alive, as nearly every living person, to see how it turns out. But turn out it will. We are an exceptional species. And sometimes our genius may be the height of stupidity. But if we're looking at peak human at 2050 of 11 billion, at a time of ultimate climate change, we got a big problem. At a time when the world hasn't worked out the new politics. In the wake of every technological innovation, there's been war. So whether it's, the steam engine and the Napoleonic Wars, whether it's the internal combustion engine and electricity, the First and Second World War, the digital age looks like it's grinding those tectonic planes of resistance from the elites to change. So hopefully we'll be able to massage our way through that without, the almost thrill that people have, the prurient thrill of war that they see on television. Maybe we just dodge that bullet, then we're into climate change. Maybe we can dodge that, then peak population, within the next, 30 years. But, we can do it. We can do it. We just have to sort it out, But that isn't optimism. That's just being desperately practical.
Well, thank you very, very much. I'm going to send you my CV for that job in the winery in Addis.
You'll be the top cork man.
Thank you very, very much. And it's been lovely talking to you. And there's so much more to talk about. And I want to know about...
Do you have safe spaces in your politically correct Yale and all that sort of stuff?
No, we need you. We need you to come and blow up our safe space. We need
spaces. There are no safe spaces. It's called life.
We need some rock and roll. That's all we need.
You're the ultimate rock and roller. Okay, guys.
Thank you, Bob. Bye-bye. Lovely to see you. Take great care. Bye, guys. Yeah.